In 2019, we had the opportunity to visit the Framework Knitters Museum in Nottingham, England. This device is fascinating on so many levels, but particularly in my mind, it represents the relationship between people, machines, and industry, and change in general. Because when the inventor first came to Queen Elizabeth I and said, "Will you give me a patent on this?" She said, "Well, you know, right now it makes kind of rough cloth, so no, come back if you can make one that can make silk stockings." And then he came back with one that could make silk stockings. And this time she said, "Yeah, okay, no, but my reason is, I'm going to come out with my actual reason. I'm afraid you're going to put all the little old ladies out of business." Because when socks are handmade, they're horrendously expensive. When they're horrendously expensive, it's actually something that you can make a living by selling. And so she was thinking about the supply and demand and realizing that if she allowed him to patent this machine, she could put a whole bunch of little old ladies out of business who would then have no livelihood, no means of providing for themselves. And so she said no. Well, he promptly moved to France and started a factory anyway. And then after her death, he was able to bring it back, and the industry kind of took hold in this area of Nottingham. Fast forward a few hundred years, there's an industry of making socks in this area, making hosiery, making knitted products. And it's very common to have lots of machines here. Families will share the machines, they'll be rented out. But then it gets interesting. See, the technology develops again. This time you get this broad machine that's able to knit two sections at once. Suddenly, instead of using high-skilled labor to make fitted socks, you know, with the heel and everything, all part of a continuous piece of fabric, you make just sheets and you cut out a rough sock shape and then you stitch them together and you pay someone very low wages to do that. And you can make even cheaper socks, which then puts the guy using this thing in a hard place. So you see it in multiple layers. This machine initially is scary because it's going to put people out of work. And then the people running this machine are themselves put out of work by this one. The Luddites were interested in smashing this thing because it puts the high-skilled machine knitter out of business. I like the history here for understanding the problem. You're able to contextualize it to see, one, it's been here for a long time. Two, these are the ways that people have dealt with it, and we get to see how they turned out. And, you know, I just the other day was able to buy a pair of socks for, you know, just a couple of pounds to get 3 pair. And if I made these by hand, they wouldn't be a couple of pounds. So this technology helps me to see the costs and benefits and the very long history of the Industrial Revolution.
How long would you be expected to carry on doing that on a shift?
About 14-ish hours.
But would you...
Technically, there was no expectation because it was all piecework.
Right.
So you worked for however many hours you wanted to. But the downside is you don't get paid till the work is done. So the more you work, the quicker that paycheck comes. And so that's why they worked really long hours. So it wasn't that they were expected to work 14-hour shifts, it was more that they had to.
Yeah. And they could stop any time to go to the loo or to...
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There was the only thing keeping them on the frame was the fact they had to work. But once they'd gone away, had the quick break, they came back, sat back here, and off they went again.
You across were saying they were all men, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that because of the physical nature of using the machine, or...?
Maybe part of it. This is back in the days where you had sort of 10 to 15 kids. And so my own little hypothesis is that it's awkward to use the frame when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And so it's also impractical to be using the frame and then have to go away for a fortnight when you're giving birth and raising the kid in its early days.
And trying to keep the kids out of trouble and chasing 2-year-olds.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the husband can do that sort of thing if he was to stay at home. But whilst the wife's heavily pregnant, it's time off, the time when the machine's not being used, and you're still renting it. And so you want to be on the machine as much as you physically can. And it was more convenient for the male to do so rather than the female. The sewing jobs, the finishing, the embroidery, repairs, that sort of thing, would have been easier to do. And so that's why I reckon that she did those sorts of roles.
So if most of the machines were rented out, would part of the weekly wage, a significant part of that, be to cover the cost of
Roughly
loaning the
speaking,
machine?
half of your wages went in general expenses. So that covered the rent of the machine, and all the machines will be roughly the same, so they'll charge about the same to rent. It'd cover the rent of the floor space, because where your machine is in the room can either cost you more or less to rent out. So where I am, say now, is a pretty nice spot.
More
Got
space
the
and
windows
lots
are-
further up.
Yeah.
Well, back in the day, that machine, a machine that wouldn't have been there, it'd be turned around and it'd be put here, because then you'd still kind of get the window light coming in. But I've got the window light next to me, I've got the fire next to me, keeping the machine warm, because the machine's got better warm. So if I want to very quickly go, I've got good access to the stairs as well, that sort of thing. So I've got a pretty good space here, so it's going to cost me quite a bit more to rent. But if I go for the coldest and darkest corner of the room, it's going to be cheaper to rent, because it's not as nice as the rest of them, but then I need to buy the candles to compensate for it. And so candles are another general expense, needles, yarn, that sort of thing. Anything needed to keep the machine running, that was your general expenses. And like I said, that was about half your wage.
The history and economics of knitting machines reminds me very much of many discussions that we're having today about the AI revolution and the potential loss of jobs it will bring. It's comforting and a little disturbing to know that these are problems that we've been dealing with for 400 years. Hopefully, we'll figure them out.